Every great venture involves an unknown contributor, a key element, an unsung hero. Tonight, we introduce you to one such person who will soon go down in internet history and lore for oh so many reasons. And welcome to the Mark and Macy Show. We come your way every Thursday night, right about 6:45, unless we have the dreaded technical issues and just love talking pre-show with our guest. Macy, how you doing this week?
I'm great. I'm so excited. One of my all-time favorite guests is in the house tonight, so I am thrilled.
One of the all-time out of five, I believe, is what our count stands currently at. But it could go to 500, and he would still be one of our all-time favorites.
Number one.
Number one. Number one for many reasons. So we will introduce you very soon to Mr. Phil Murphy. So, Macy, what's going on this week?
Not too much. Went to Trenton Thunder 2 nights ago. Saw A-Rod batting for the Thunder. 2 for 4, not a bad night. Last night he hit a home run, so he looks, pretty well. It's finally hot, baseball weather, nachos, ice cream. It's good, dude. Life is good.
I'm guessing that A-Rod is getting himself into form similar to what I was doing earlier this morning, playing some softball in the ESPN Softball League for the first time in like 4 or 5 years. So our team lost. I'm not going to tell you the score. So we have a department team that I used to play on, and now we have so many people in our department that want to play that there is a second team forming that has formed, and they asked me to play, and so I dusted off the cleats, did the whole deal, came out for the first time this week, and hit the batting cages last night so I wouldn't embarrass myself, and I gave them a solid 1-for-1 before we got mercy ruled. And I DH'd. I said I refuse to play in the field, not going to embarrass myself for the first game. I will be out there after watching my teammates who are hopefully not checking us out tonight. I will be in the field for the second game. I will do that. But it was fun to be back on the softball field, and I think my face shows it because it was mighty hot today, and I'm sure they're in Philly too.
Yeah, well, welcome out of retirement. No, it's definitely so hot. It went from, 50s, 60s, and rain and wind to, I think, 94 I saw today. So it's a little toasty.
Okay, Macy, I think without further ado...
Talking about toasty and hot now. Our next guest. No.
This is why you should introduce the guests, Macy.
No, Phil is more than that. Come on. Come on.
Well, that's the tip of the iceberg. Toasty, hot iceberg doesn't quite go, but I tried. Mr. Phil Murphy, ESPN's own. Phil, thank you so much for joining the Mark and Macy show here.
Yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity to double dutch into this conversation. But yeah, thank you guys for having me on the show. I'm excited to talk about whatever you want to talk about. You guys are both friends of mine who I've known for a few years now, and this is my first venture into the Mark and Macy show, so I'm really excited.
Yes, and so if you're unfamiliar with Phil's work, he works for ESPN. He's an anchor, reporter, and producer, digital media. You can catch him on college football coverage as well on ESPNU, sometimes ESPN2. Phil is all over the place. Can you give us an idea, Phil, of what you've been working on just over the last few weeks and basically going back to college football because, I'm a college football nut, so that's where I connect with you most of the time is involving your college football work and so much that you're doing out there.
Yeah, I mean, with college football, as you know, Mark, it's somewhat seasonal. I do that, especially during the fall, just week-to-week coverage of the season. But during the NFL draft, kind of shift there, the draft-eligible players, I do some work with Mel Kiper, Todd McShay. That's more the production side, the behind-the-scenes stuff with the draft. So I was full throttle there until about a month ago. And now college football hasn't yet picked up. Art Briles news notwithstanding today, that kind of blew the doors off everything, but it had been somewhat slow. And year-round, I also cover MMA. So UFC has been a passion of mine for some time, and ESPN graciously afforded me the opportunity to start covering it for them in 2012 in a producer capacity and an anchor capacity. I've covered a couple events, and I'll be at UFC 199 next week in LA, so that'll be a lot of fun. I'll be backstage doing post-fight interviews for ESPN.com and other platforms should there be any interest.
So, Phil, you now work for ESPN, and every day you seem to be growing and covering something else. When you wake up in the morning, what's your thought? When you're driving to work and, everyone's got those morning thoughts, what are yours?
When I wake up in the morning, it's usually I spend the first 25 minutes after my alarm scrolling through Twitter and just vegging out. No, but I love and live and breathe sports. I always have. My dad was in the military for 29 and a half years. So from birth until 18, I moved all over the place. Between kindergarten and my 12th grade year, I went to 12 different schools. So as I moved around, it was always new friends. I mean, this is pre-Facebook, pre-MySpace, pre-social media. So anytime I'd go somewhere, for the first month or month and a half till school or sports started, the only thing I had was ESPN or other sports outlets, the local sports outlets. So I became invested in sports really early. So I think that's part of the reason I'm in so many different sports verticals at ESPN is because I hear of something. I produced a video 2 days ago on Manuel Neuer, the German goalkeeper, also goalkeeper for Bayern Munich. So I hear him like, yeah, I know that guy, I love him, and it's so ingrained in who I am and what my passions are that, yeah, I mean, it's what I do. So a lot of on my Twitter page, most of my followers are sports accounts. So that's kind of what I get tied into and just catch up on the day.
Yeah, talking about your passions, you introduced me when we first met to one of your big passions, UFC and MMA. I can never get it straight at what point I should be saying UFC and at what point I should be saying MMA.
I can help.
I know you've helped me in the past, and you know how long I remembered that. But help me out again.
All right. So, trying to think of another sport comparison. Okay. You can talk about professional basketball, or you can talk about the NBA. Now, are there other professional basketball leagues aside from the NBA? Sure. I know the D League is affiliated with most NBA teams, but there was a CBA for a while and all these other leagues, before the ABA merger. So think of the NBA as the UFC, the king of the basketball world, and whereas MMA, mixed martial arts, is the umbrella under which the UFC falls. So at the top you have the UFC, and then thereafter it's Bellator, and then World Series of Fighting, and then a bunch of local outlets underneath that.
It is just crystal clear to me right now.
Done. Taken care of.
I got it.
So, Phil, you mentioned before Twitter, and yes, we met via Twitter, and it's really interesting how you can meet people. But within sports, I think Twitter is one of the biggest things out there. What kind of impact would you say Twitter has on sports journalism?
Man, that's a good question. I go to this journalism conference every year in DC. It's actually at my college, which is why they invite me to it, George Mason University, and that is almost annually a question about how does social media tie into sports coverage, and what Twitter has become. I mean, it's essentially a customized newspaper. So, Macy, I know you and I are both Mets fans. We follow a lot of Mets accounts, whether they're fan accounts, local reporters. Shout out to my buddy James Wagner, who just got hired by the New York Post to cover the Mets. He's going to be starting in mid-June, so Twitter follow there if you are a Mets fan as well. And you can customize news and what you care about. So, in that sense, you're able to just take in whatever it is you want and block out whatever it is you don't want. I'm fairly apolitical. I know this year, it's an election year. A lot of people are going on, and there's so much news to be found in politics. I don't undermine the value of it. I just don't find it that compelling. So I don't follow many political accounts. So that's it. I just described what Twitter is. I'm not breaking any ground there. But with that becomes the ability to break news at a whim. Or an athlete, him or herself, can break news without calling a press conference. Conor McGregor, UFC fighter, tweets out, "I've decided to retire young. Thanks for the cheese. See us later." And it gets like 15,000 retweets. I mean, it was rivaling Marshawn Lynch's retirement tweet as the biggest sports tweet of the year. And he just decided on a whim on his couch to break that. There was no format needed. But as Spider-Man says, with great power comes great responsibility. So in a sports journalism sense, in what you and I and Mark do, man, it's so much better to be right than to be first. Everyone wants to be first. Everyone wants to break the story, but credibility is lost so much faster than it's gained. So for me to get that second or third sourcing is definitely worth the trouble, because I'd rather have a name that people say, okay, I can take it to the bank, than a website that's, I'm not going to name them, but you know who they are, and whether it's in entertainment or sports or politics or news, where they say something and you always take it with a grain of salt because you don't quite trust them. So that's the double-edged sword of social media, Twitter in particular, because people see you and they say, hey, there's something I value about this person, their opinion, their access, what their interests are. I want to follow them. And then you have a responsibility, just a journalistic responsibility to be reliable. And you see, like, Uncle Chaps is someone who's famous for changing his Twitter logo. It's a parody account, but he changes his Twitter logo to either SportsCenter or NBC Sports or one of these high-tier sports reporting platforms, and then he puts out bogus news. Like when Stephen Curry went down with his knee injury, he tweeted out the next day, changed his logo on his Twitter account to the SportsCenter logo, and said, Stephen Curry has torn his ACL, breaking. And it got hundreds and hundreds of retweets because everyone's like, I got to get this out there. And he was just trolling everyone. So even if people aren't being that malicious, sometimes they're just misinformed, and we have a responsibility to make sure what we're reporting is reliable.
So, Phil, what's the game? What's the interview? What's the situation that you have found yourself in and thought, yeah, this is why I do what I do. This is cool. Yeah.
Oh, man, there are a couple. I don't work in features all that much. I respect the heck out of our E60 crew. And, I mean, that's not just me. They just won 2 sports Emmys. So that's a pretty wide opinion there. The personalities, and using sports as a canvas to tell a story, I think is really powerful. There was a girl who I guarantee you've never heard of named Carly Cottingham. I was working at ESPN for about a year, and I was assigned a feature up in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Very long story, very short. She developed a blood clot, restricted blood flow in her thoracic outlet, which is an artery up by your collarbone. It went untreated. It was essentially malpractice. She had to have her arm amputated 4 months before her senior basketball season, and she was like a low to mid-major basketball recruit. She was very right-hand dominant as a player. It was her right hand that, from the elbow down, had to be amputated. 90 days after the surgery, she was out playing basketball again and played her senior season with one arm and retaught her. I mean, she would bandage her arm herself multiple times a day, very painful practice, so she can go out and just shoot in her driveway and learn to dribble with her left hand and learn, okay, how can I use this appendage to play a game? And just to see someone's resilience. I mean, no one cares about, the fact that she scored 2 points a game. Just to see someone play have that resilience to do something that she loved and inspire so many people through that, that's the kind of stuff that I really enjoy. And yes, I've been blessed and fortunate enough to interview a lot of people whose names carry a lot of weight in the sports world, but the ones that I remember and the ones that, man, I have to text my friends about are stories like that. So a lot of it is that E60, type avenue, the features units and the crew there at ESPN, what they do.
That's really cool, and I think those are the stories that people do want to see, and I think that's more popular now than just hearing the same stories from the same top athletes over and over again. So sports are constantly, it seems like they're kind of changing, rules are changing. Where do you see professional sports in 5 years?
That's a good question. I see a lot of it, the lines between entertainment and sports are getting blurred further and further, and I think that's okay. I mean, sports are supposed to be fun. I'm a fan of the old school SportsCenter anchors who would make puns on guys' names and have catchphrases and all that. Not too cheesy, but I do like that kind of stuff. So you see now, turn on any major sports network, Fox Sports Live, SportsCenter, they're really trying to speak beyond the sports story. And yes, there are going to be some people who are maybe a little more old school. You guys don't show enough highlights and whatnot. And there certainly is a value for highlights. But I would say the lines between entertainment and sports would get further blurred. I think that's a trajectory that we're on. And it'll be more about the athletes themselves. They become stars, and then, like Johnny Manziel gets reported on all the time, no matter what he does. When was the last time he took a meaningful snap in the NFL? I mean, when's the next time he's going to take a meaningful snap in the NFL? Not, but anytime he does anything, every sports outlet's going to report it because that's what people care about. For better or worse sometimes, and he might be an example of the for worse. But that's where I think it's going to go. I think we're going to get further away from Team A beating Team B, and more look at the characters that do it.
So you bring up a good point, Phil, because I tend to wonder how much the media outlets are driving the sports consciousness versus how much are they responding to what people want to see. So the Johnny Manziel example being what it is, how much is being are the media outlets determining that, hey, we think people want to see this and therefore we're throwing it out there, therefore it's a cycle of sorts, a vicious cycle of sorts, versus, we see it, you mentioned the election year. How much do we see that's really relevant to the candidacy of a president and whether that person is capable of holding that position versus all this other stuff that is very meaningless? But my argument to one of my friends the other day was, I think, unfortunately, that's what people want to hear about. That's what they want to see. That's what catches the attention.
Yeah, it's a tug and pull. I mean, we have to triage and figure out, okay, what's the most important sports story? But ultimately, the media business is just that, a business. So we need to also remember, what pays the bills. I'm as a producer, I'm privy to a lot of the information as far as what videos get watched the most. And seeing our NFL traffic in May, that sport is king, and it's going to be king, even if it's not the most relevant sport at the moment. I mean, people aren't going to be. We're in OTAs, so yeah, some of it is the media, us figuring out, okay, what do people want to see? But you see that in local news anyway. Everyone will complain, oh, all you guys talk about is negative news. 7 of the 10 stories tonight were, homicide or kidnapping or some kind of violent crime. But those are the stories that get traffic. So in one sense, you need to fish where there are fish. And in the other sense, there is a responsibility to, a perfect example with what ESPN did, the Invictus Games. Man, those are some inspiring stories of military veterans who've had some kind of tragic injury who are using sports as a form of recuperation and just to find some kind of purpose or refind their purpose in life after serving their countries and having something tragic happen to them. We poured a lot of resources into that, and you and I both know, that didn't kill it in the ratings, but there were stories worth telling, so they were told. So it is a tug and pull. The one pet peeve I have, and every network is guilty of this, is an analyst says something outlandish, and then the entire network then reports on that story. It's like the self-indulged practice of some NBA analyst, pick your network, says Steph Curry shouldn't have been unanimous MVP, or worse yet, he wouldn't have been an all-star in the 80s. Take that as an example. And then the entire rest of the sports discourse that day is, well, this guy said Steph Curry wouldn't be an all-star in the 80s. What do you guys think about that? And then it becomes this whole echo chamber of, a lot of the times they're platitudes, because oftentimes the reason it's brought to such a level is because it's an opinion that is unfounded. So people are saying, well, I disagree with that, and you hear a bunch of people just disagreeing with it in kind. That's my one pet peeve with the news cycle nowadays. But to answer your question, I'm very long-winded. I apologize, guys, but I would say there's a tug and pull and a certain balance there to be kept.
You are the show, Phil. You don't need to apologize. Macy.
Yes. Okay, so Phil, I was very interested to hear, and I did not know that you always went to different schools within so many years. Mm-hmm. So that's tough. And if you were to do that nowadays, you have the internet, you have social media, you have TVs where you can watch any game. Growing up, you were obviously fans of certain teams. When you moved, were you always fans of the same team? Did it change? Did players change for you? What was that like? Because I think nowadays it would be different for kids than it would be for someone who did it, back in the 90s.
Thank you for not making me feel too old there. I have a few months left in my 20s that I'm clinging to for dear life.
Could be making somebody else feel old, but go ahead, Phil.
So when I moved, I brought the teams with me because it was there was a measure of consistency there. My dad passed along 2 teams to me. And Macy, I think this is why you and I became friends initially. The 2 teams my dad passed along were his alma mater, Penn State, and the New York Mets. He grew up an hour from New York City, and they won the World Series when he was 9. So I didn't have an option with those teams. I was the baby in that kind of gear. As when my mom was pregnant with me, I was at every game in Penn State's most recent national championship season. So I didn't have an option with those. As I moved around, I lived in St. Louis when I was 5 to 8, about 6 to 8, somewhere in that range. And everyone was a hardcore Blues fan. And my buddy's dad was the local weatherman, so he had great access to the game. I was, rinkside a number of times. So I'm Brett Hull, Al McInnes, Cujo. I have a Peter Zezel hockey stick 10 feet from me. And so that's a team I picked. I was heartbroken last night when they lost to the Sharks. I picked up that team, and then I kind of brought it with me. So I have kind of a national spread. And when I'm a Broncos fan and a Mets fan, and last year people were like, oh yeah, World Series and a Super Bowl, World Series berth and a Super Bowl, real tough on the bandwagon. Dude, rewind 4 years when the Broncos had the number 2 pick and took Von Miller, and Macy, you know how terrible the Mets were for a good portion of the aughts, the 2000s. So yeah, I brought them with me. I did pick up to a degree the Washington Capitals when I moved to DC, and that kind of goes to your point, Macy. I moved to Germany, the lockout happened. I moved back, and I'm like, all right, let's see the Blues. And there were none of the same guys. So there was a season where I was a little bit disenchanted by it. Like, okay, I'm not going to root for laundry. And I was living in D.C. They had just drafted Ovechkin, and I was like, I can get on with that. I had, if I hate the guy who had multiple teams in one sport, but I'm him in hockey. I do want the Blues to do well, and I do want the Capitals to do well, and I would actually hate it if they met in the Stanley Cup Finals, which almost I thought was going to happen this year. But outside of that, I mean, it's not too dissimilar from a situation where, say, you grew up rooting for a college football team and then you get accepted with a scholarship to a school of their rival. I have a friend who's in that situation. She grew up an Auburn fan and went to Mississippi State on scholarship. So who does she root for during football season? It's torn. There's a split loyalty there. But that was kind of my roadmap. As I went around the country, picked up teams all over the place. I'm I'm Mets, Broncos, Penn State. I don't have multiple teams in those sports, so don't think like I just root for the entire Mid-Atlantic. But okay. Those are my teams.
There, Phil.
Yeah.
I jump all over people like that. So we talked about what you enjoyed covering, and you took us down a different path, a very more meaningful path. Looking ahead, what would you like to cover in your broadcasting future, and what would be that dream job, that dream position?
Oh man, I wasn't prepared for that question. I've said I love MMA. I love the UFC, and I think part of what I like about it so much is there's so many untapped storylines. For example, I had a story that came out yesterday with Miesha Tate. Sorry for tooting my own horn, but I was very proud of it and how it came out. And within MMA, champions fight maybe twice a year, and if the fights go the distance, you see them competing for 1 hour because you have 5-minute rounds with 4 1-minute breaks between each one. So that's 29 minutes times 2. If you're watching Steph Curry 82 times a year plus 16, 20 times in the playoffs if they make a title run, you're seeing him 100 times in a calendar year and at 2.5 hours a clip. There's so much exposure to these guys. As much as you may know about Miesha Tate, John Jones, whomever, you only see them compete for such a short period. So being able to go and tell those stories, I think, is awesome, and really get to meet and know those fighters. So there's a series I launched on ESPN called Mma Rewind, where we look at this person's path to the UFC. And UFC at its level's really only been there for, I know it started in 1993 with UFC 1, but the modern era is really only the last 15 years. So anyone competing now predated that. So how did they get there? So with Miesha, she was a high school wrestler because she couldn't play basketball, and then she went through this amateur avenue. We were showing her fights that were it was like literally a nightclub that was gutted so they could put a ring in there, and it's attached to a Chinese buffet. And this was 4 years ago. She's fighting at this venue. So that's the kind of stuff I love. So, if you said you could cover any sport for the rest of your career, it would be mixed martial arts, specifically the UFC. That's why I'm so excited to be going to UFC 199 next week and then UFC 200 in July. I think both those events will be a lot of fun. And it's really cool to see MMA continuing to get more and more mainstream.
Phil, would you ever jump in the ring?
I boxed today, but the bag doesn't hit back is the thing. So I am past the point, I think, where I could train and be effective in the cage. So no, I don't want to ever be in a situation where I have to fight someone. And for me to like with my schedule, I could do just enough jiu-jitsu or judo or whatever it is I'd be training in to get my butt kicked about once a week. The guys who are good at it, they go 4 or 5 days a week. I don't have the time to do that. So I'd be going just enough to get my butt kicked by them. And, just no. The short answer to your question is no.
So one of the big reasons why we were so excited to have Phil on was that we're all friends. So even before we started the show, the pre-show conversation was even more fun than what's happened over the last 20, 25 minutes. But the next thing was we know Phil knows his stuff. He was going to bring great conversation to the sports debate and discussion. The third reason is because without Phil, there's no Mark and Macy show. So Phil, how did this come about? Of course, I know how it started. Basically, I was looking for a co-host, and I was searching all over the place, just saying, hey, on Twitter and Facebook, if you've got any great selections, let me know. And different people served up about 5 total, including Phil, who had the right selection.
Yeah, Mark, I follow both of you on social media. I know you independently of one another. Again, Macy and I connected maybe 3 or 4 years ago because just in social media channels, I see someone in the sports industry, respect her work, likes the same teams I do. Okay. We mutually followed each other on Twitter. Mark, I know you from our church and our work, and just you and I have become friends in addition to that. So you guys both had the social media channels going. I have friendships with each of you. I know where you guys are, what you're looking for. I'd come on previous iterations of Mark Rogers TV to preview a handful of UFC fights in the past. And Macy and I, have been friends for a few years, and I knew where she was in her career, what she was looking for. And then when you put out an open solicitation on your Twitter account saying, hey, I'm looking for a co-host, I'm looking for this person to fill these criteria, I was like, I know someone who fits that. So I texted you, Mark, first, and I said, hey, I might have someone. How do you want me to introduce you? And you're like, oh, just give me their contact info. So I said, all right. Reach out to Macy and said, hey, here's a situation, sent her a screen grab or something of the tweet. Are you interested? And she didn't text me back she called me right away and said, yeah, I want some more information on this. What's the deal? So at that point, I just stepped out and I was like, hey, you guys are both my friends. I hope it works out because I think it'd be cool. I think it'd be a good fit. But if not, I did my due diligence and it's really cool to see it take off. So
yeah, and when she jumped on that invitation, little did she know what she was getting herself into.
Oh, come on, Mark, you're low maintenance.
But still we are here 25 weeks later, and Macy actually pointed this out last week. It's a silver anniversary of sorts. So this is our 25th edition, and wow, we have you as our special guest. It just worked together, just fit.
That's amazing. And I know that the initial phone call was longer than 25 weeks ago, because I know there were some conceptual things for you guys to get going. But that's awesome how that worked out. The silver anniversary. It's an honor to be a guest on your show.
And you've got to be a guest again. That's all there is to it, Phil. So we know that your schedule is crazy. I don't think Macy was on with us a few minutes before we started when you were running down what your next 40 or 45 days look like. But it's pretty crazy stuff. You're going to be all over the place.
Yeah, UFC 199. My girlfriend lives in Kansas City, so I'll be out there for 4th of July, but I'm going straight from there to Vegas for UFC 200 and a couple of UFC events through the summer. We got conference football or college football conference media days. Some of them come through ESPN. We have to go to some of them. So, yeah, I'll be on the road a lot. I think the math worked out to over the next 42 days, I'll be on the road for 22 of them, which stinks. It's going to be hard to find a gym where I can stay in shape. But it'll be a lot of fun. Get the frequent flyer miles going, and most importantly, see a lot of cool things. And that's what most excites me. But to anyone who's like, oh, my roommates, we have a little whiteboard over here. Well, each of us is going to be out of town. Like, oh, you're lucky you get to travel all this time. Travel is sexy to the people who don't do it. If you do it, like, there's nothing fun about UFC 199. Yes, it's going to be great to be in Inglewood, California, the Forum for that event, and then the next day go out to the Elite 11 finals in Redondo Beach, Redondo Union High School. But then going straight from the field to the airport and sitting for 5 hours and then getting on a red eye, you pay your dues. So I'm going to be worn out come mid-July. So I think, or late July. I think I'll take a couple weeks off before college football season, just go sleep at a pool somewhere, and then hopefully come back rejuvenated and tan and maybe there for another iteration of the Mark and Macy show.
So it's Phil Murphy, ESPN. You can find him on Twitter at Phil_sports. And if people are just floating around ESPN.com in particular, where can they find you?
Probably search is the best way because it's I am on a number of sports, so it's not like, hey, I have my own page or something. But yeah, if I don't know why someone would want to see specifically the work I do, but my name is attached to everything from interviews to studio shows to highlight reads. But yeah, the thing I did most recently was the Misha Tate story of how she came to UFC stardom. I have one brewing similarly with John Jones that I'm very excited about. And then every week I do a couple segments on college football recruiting. So right now the big topic is the whole deregulation of text messages, which it's as nerdy as it sounds, but now coaches can send unlimited text messages to recruits. So we wanted to get their reacts on it. That came out today as well.
Phil Murphy, thank you so much. We have tried to make this work for several weeks now, and we are so glad that it came together.
Hey, thank you guys for having me on. It's awesome to see you guys doing great work. Keep it up.
You've got the open invite, always.
Good to know, brother.
All right, Phil.
Bye, Phil. Thanks.
Well, that was so very cool. That was great to have Phil on here, and you can stick around for a couple more minutes. We're probably wrapping, or you can, if you need to go, Phil. Certainly, we will catch up with you soon.
I'll hang out in case I'm needed for something.
Well, if you're ever looking to get into a fantasy baseball league, we've thought of everything, Phil. Or
leave now, Phil. Leave now.
Well, it's too late for this year. Too late, Phil. So you've got like 9 months to come up with an excuse not to join our fantasy baseball league next year. So it's too late this year. But Macy's idea, and I immediately tabbed it as a great one. Let's have a Mark and Macy show fantasy baseball league. So, and to the winner, this is about the best we can do. A little low on the budget right now. The budgetary constraints kind of restrict us from a few things. So right now, the winner gets to co-host the show. That's what we've decided upon.
But
Macy,
they get
commissioner.
to root one of us. So
possibly we could give them the option.
Makes it so much better.
That they kick one of us out?
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. So I've got the week off, Phil, sometime in early to mid-October. So
I think that's a brilliant idea. I think that's the way to go. And yeah, fan hosting, and they get to boot someone. But there has to be some other element to it beyond just getting booted. You have to do something else to kind of support the show. I don't know what it would be. Something moderately embarrassing. So
I am not agreeing with you, Phil, because again, the percentages say that I'm going to be that guy.
I know. That's why I'm pitching
idea.
The idea. That's why I'm pitching the idea, because I do expect that you would be the one voted off.
And you know, Phil, that would be a good idea if we were going to select who had the worst record. Let's say if Macy and I were competing against each other in fantasy baseball, and the loser, who would right now be not me, and the loser would have to do an embarrassing thing, I might be all for that. But just to have some knucklehead who just happens to win our fantasy baseball league boot me off, plus force me to do something embarrassing, I can't pull the trigger on that one. Even though Macy is the commissioner of the Fantasy Baseball League, and I guess she could probably wield that power.
Yeah, I'm just my opinion. I don't think Mark sounds like a team player at the moment. What do you think, Macy?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is all about fun. And yeah, to have Mark booted might be fun, but it might be kind of boring. So we need something even more fun. So maybe like we have to put Mark on mute. Like he can join the show, but he's on mute the whole time, kind of like our conversation with you earlier, where we could see you, but we couldn't hear you. So Mark could sit there and talk to himself the whole time and respond to everything we're saying, but we can't hear him.
All right. You've got plenty of time to kick that around in between those years there, Macy, and you just let me know what I'm going to have to be subjected to.
Mark, you could win it all and boot me. Have your own show.
No, this is a selection by somebody, and I think by the makeup of our fantasy baseball league, I know where this is headed.
Never know, Mark.
All right. So, this is the Mark and Macy show. You can join us every Thursday night. We typically join you on Blab to get that engagement from the audience. Tonight we're on Google Hangouts, so you can join us on Google Hangouts as well. The record is posted on YouTube, and also I posted on my Facebook page as well. And we've got the Twitter going. Phil, you can join us there. I don't know if you're following us on Twitter.
I think I am, right? Am I not?
Just making sure.
I will fix this right now. Mark and Macy show.
Mark and Macy show.
All right, now I'm following you. I wasn't. I'm sorry.
Good for you. I think we're up to 72 now.
73.
73. All right. And we also have a website, markandmacyshow.webs.com. And I think I've covered everything. So, again, Phil, this was great. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure, guys.
We have done all sorts of damage, and we will catch everyone next week.